Thank you very much, Henrik. I'm so glad you had a good experience at Lego. But how can we make sure that that's the typical experience for everyone? And how can we make sure that we can get over the downsides? There are plenty of upsides we've heard. We've had some fantastic examples here, haven't we? From DC Water, from Matt Rees, from the extraordinary things they're doing in Vestland, where actually the use of public transport has gone up, apparently, because the price of taking a public bus has gone down, to what we've just been hearing from Henrik Sattfeldt. But where is the downside? Where is the price that we have to pay in order to accelerate this? Or are we basically saying that the human factor, our behavior and our buy-in to accelerating the transition should basically magically be provided by, or not so magically, by progressive cities, by technical solutions, which are basically doing the difficult work for us. So all we do is then just take part in the EV revolution or clean public transport. Do we ourselves, as citizens, have to make sacrifices? That's the next question I would like to ask you. And perhaps we can start with Linda Steg. What is the role of all of us in driving the transition, which has not been sorted out for us by DC Water or by Vestland?
Oh, difficult question. Well, I think there's two important things that I would like to mention. One of them is that people often underestimate the likelihood that others will act, or that others care about the environment. So we think that we care more about the environment than other people, or than the government, or than industry, and that might inhibit individual actions. That's one of them. I think another barrier is that many people, and you already hinted on this, have the assumption that adopting sustainable lifestyles will mean that we need to sacrifice. There's all types of things. It's not only that. So there's two things that you can say about it. First of all, people oftentimes are reluctant to change. They have a status quo bias. They think the current situation is better and any change will be worse. And they underestimate the advantages that might occur in change as well. And the other thing is that at least in the debates in the Netherlands, but probably in any other country as well, at least populists have the tendency to say, either we combat climate change, we adopt sustainable lifestyles, and we will be a horrible life because we can't do anything we like anymore, we can't fly, we can't drive, we can't eat meat, horrible, 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 or we do nothing and everything will stay the same. But that's not true, and that's what the latest IPCC report also indicated quite vividly, right? If we do nothing, our lifestyles will also change. We need to adapt to climate change, and the world will be not a pleasant place to live anymore. So I think it's also a matter of having a fair trade-off to make, tell people very clearly what the different options are, and having trials or demonstrating people how it might look like. So demonstration projects or trials might be very important as well, so that people experience that change is not only a bad thing. And you saw it around the COVID crisis, right? So the people were told to stay at home immediately, at least in the Netherlands and in other European countries as well. They were restricted, had to work at home. If you would have asked me 2 years before, will that ever happen? I would say no, no, no. But it happened. But it also happened because the government supported people that were forced to stay at home. So they created the right circumstances, and people also discovered that it had positive changes as well.
Alexander Bekjev.
Well, I think obviously there will be some sacrifices to be made, but I want to support you that lack of imagination, as I ended my speech on, is a big problem. And I think, for example, what Elon Musk did by making the Tesla look great and becoming a status symbol is extremely important. I notice now that within Sintef, where I'm having 2,200 people, There's a strong trend now that some people want vegan food or vegetarian food in the canteen and others won't. How do we make that an attractive choice? I think that's part of now fortunately we're going to do a tender for canteen. How can we, how can I as a leader try to hit the right balance? You need to attract the best people, so you can't serve food they don't want, but at the same time show some progressiveness in these areas. And I think your presentation was very good in that we can make it very complicated, or we can say that incentives work, fashion works, thought leadership, talking about it, being good role models. I think having some faith in that system working is important. One of the topics I've been working mostly on is mobility. And there's the sense that, in a climate-friendly future, you will not move. The best trip is the one that you don't take. At the same time, if you look at, if you have zero emissions, if you have, if you do something about the tire, of course you need roads. If the world had started now, we wouldn't build roads, we would have drones, and we would just jump from place to place. But I think the opportunities to live a reasonably sustainable life with recycling, repurposing, reuse is quite attractive. So we shouldn't talk it down into too much of a problem. But of course, there's a big balance.
So there's a question that's been coming in right through the day, which I've kind of ignored, which has been coming in from all of you on my iPad, which is about using less energy, being more efficient. Don't we need to think about just doing less, right? And Henrik Satnes, you sort of referred to that when you were speaking by talking about a massive energy efficiency effort that we're in the middle of right now. You mentioned heat pumps and other technologies which are inherently more efficient. How can we all, as citizens, do more with less? Or at least the same with less?
So I think we need to have two thoughts in our head at the same time. We all consume directly or indirectly energy today, which, if we look at it from a global citizen perspective, has greenhouse gas emissions, right? So even if we were to halve our consumption, we would still have significant greenhouse gas emissions. So those we need to cut. But obviously, as you said, being more efficient about the energy use has also effects on the amount of energy or the amount of emissions we produce. There's, of course, a lot we can do. We can insulate our homes, we can actually travel less, or we can then use more efficient means to do so, right? So like I said, an electric vehicle, much more efficient than its fossil fuel companion. It is 3 to 4 times. And there's plenty of technology that will actually drive that, in addition to, of course, simply using less, making do with less, which you can do. Challenge, I think, with it is basically what we talk about in this session. It is not a very appealing proposition, right? So you need to find the balance there between making it attractive, making it appealing, while at the same time, solving the technological challenges in the background.
It's not appealing, is it? We've gotten used to a very comfortable way of life, and we now have to make sacrifices, or is it going to be sorted out for us? When you were speaking to us, Matt, I kept thinking about this book that I must have read 20 or 30 years ago, which in English, in England, was released as Miss Miller's Feeling for Snow. It might have been called something different in the US, Miss Miller's Sments of Snow, and I think it's written in Danish, so you'll know it as something else altogether in Norway. And it's a thriller of some sort, I can't remember the details, but it ends with Miss Miller talking to an old Inuit lady who had moved from a community of great hardship, but a lot of solidarity, to living in a big block in one of those kind of big housing estate things, and lost all the community. And she asked her, would you ever go back, to get back that sense of community and culture? And the old lady said something which has always stuck in my head, and that was, you know what, no, because I would really miss having my daily hot shower. And I remember reading this, it's a thriller, yeah, and I remember thinking, wow, and when you were talking, it suddenly remind me of this book, right? Do we all need to get to that point where we don't take a daily hot shower for granted, Matt?
I would hope we would not get to that point, but I think about how do we get at this? And so I'm obviously coming at it from a water management perspective, and I think what I find the path ahead exciting. Now, I am a glass half full kind of a person, and I think about the ways in which we get at this. You talked about before, does there need to be pain? Does there need to be lifestyle changes? And I think the way as we sit in this role where we have customers who are ratepayers, and that's who we engage with, but also engage with the broader community, how do we get at this as a sector that has 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions? So, obviously there are things we could do that might wind up increasing rates, and that's always at the forefront, the affordability of our water, because water is a human right and people need water to live, so we can't make that unaffordable. But there are also approaches we can take from, say, thinking about technology. We heard about innovation earlier. Are there ways to do things more efficiently? Are there new technologies? Can we learn from other sectors and bring those technologies in to the water sector? Does there need to be personal sacrifice? I would say that yes, there probably does need to be some. I think our role as, I'm an engineer, and I think as engineers and scientists and inventors, I think we want to look at how do we try to minimize that while moving forward towards those net zero goals, whatever they may be. We don't have that pathway completely laid out yet. But I am optimistic about the opportunities that are coming through, so that yes, we want everyone to have a comfortable lifestyle, and to the degree that water plays a part in that, we need to and have to continue to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Sorry for putting you on the spot there. And what was occurring to me listening to you, Solveig, was that Westland has done an extraordinary amount of heavy lifting, but how far can regional politicians, who are effectively having to make these decisions and pay for it, I presume, how far can you take this without the backing of the centre and without the support of your community?
That's a good question. I think we have brave politicians. They have high climate ambitions and they want to do a difference. But there come to some point that if things are too expensive, then it costs too much. But so far they have been doing more than you could expect, I guess. And especially when we're starting with new technologies, it will be expensive in the start, then it will be cheaper afterwards. I say that on the bus contracts, electric buses were actually cheaper than the old diesel contracts. And I hope that other regions will experience the same when it comes to electric ferries.
So the ferries to begin with, sorry to interrupt you, the ferries to begin with were more expensive, were they? And so the people of Westland had to be prepared to pay more.
They are more expensive, and the same is the fast passenger boats. But the people pay the same ticket price as before, but we as a council have less money to roads, to culture, and to schools than we would. So it's a mismatch between the national level, say that we as a county should go for zero emission and low emission transport. And they say it verbally, but in the economic framework, they tell us to choose the old diesel contracts. So we have to reduce that mismatch. And I hope that the market will move forward, and I guess that will happen. But right now it's more expensive. So it costs some money for our politicians, and it's a cost.
Thanks for spelling it out. Thanks, Solveig. Let's have some questions from our expert panel. Amparo Alonso Betanzos.
Hi, thanks. Well, my field is artificial intelligence, so I was a little sad this morning when we started to relate artificial intelligence to crutches at the beginning, and then to something that, of course, cannot substitute infrastructure, and I imagine we didn't need to do that. In this afternoon, everything went a little better with Alexandra talking about artificial intelligence for optimized construction sites and for optimized charting. So my reflection here is that we have talked about cooperation between different areas, you know, financing, social lifestyle changes, and different things. And I think another important thing that it was in the air, but we didn't mention, is the cooperation between the different areas of science, of engineering, and of course of human and social sciences. Because if we don't cooperate with all these technical changes that we have in hand, we will not be able to reach, for me, the energy transition. I don't know which is your opinion, or if anyone else wants to comment on this.
Alexandra Becher.
I'd love to comment on that. We had a conference called The Digital Future, where we had a poll, you know, will artificial intelligence help the climate transition or will it not? And of course, most people in the audience said it will absolutely help, but the dean of the D-Science initiative in the city of, in the University of Oslo, he put his hand up and said he thought it would not, because AI is driving so much data use, and it's, you know, it's increasing. It's now overtaking the airline industry as an emitter. And he said that he had stopped replying "thank you" as an energy conservation measure. You know, that our thoughtless use of electricity on the digital side.
That's a really good point, Alexandra. We can all stop responding to so many emails, no? And surely we can all stop copying in so many people into so many emails. Isn't that electric hungry? A small little thing that we can all do.
But,
sorry, go on.
You know, obviously AI is very, you know, we try to apply it everywhere in order to optimize things, but at the same time, energy management in the data sector is hugely important. And I guess that's why several of the large tech companies are now looking at how can they compensate through hard climate measures on the carbon removal in order to justify their experience. But finding ways to for energy efficiency in the data sector is a priority.
Henrik Satmas.
Well, now I wanted to say something else when Alexandra ended, where she ended. The energy use of data is actually super interesting. We have, in Ireland, we have done a number of contracts actually with Microsoft to supply them with renewable power. And they are really eager, for the reasons that you just mentioned, to enter into those types of deals with us and to expand that partnership if possible. So,
Matt Rees.
Yes, thank you. As the camera panned over before, and I realized I'm looking at the STEAM panel here in front, I saw Dr. Stephen Gabriel. And he's frankly the reason I'm here today. And I want to explain that it's this use of new technologies, new approaches from outside of, or in my case, the water sector, applied to some of our challenges, that's helping us look at how do we optimize what we do. We're applying game theory modeling to looking at optimizing on a broad watershed or catchment basin. How do we treat water? How do we clean water? How do we get multiple players involved? And it is that drawing from somewhere else. I mean, the easy answers are over. We are not going to get to where we need to get using simple solutions. So it becomes more complex, and it's not just a technological solution either. So this idea of engaging the public, the intimate relationship with our customers, that's got to be a part of the equation. We can't do that. I used the term before, behind the fence line. And I think as engineers, it's easy just to want to try to control what we can using dials and switches. But the fact is, we're trying to address a global problem. And that global problem requires some really complex solutions that engages everyone, as we're discussing here. So I'm excited about the potential uses of AI. I don't even know what they all are yet, you know, but we've got to move down that road, not just for the water sector, but for all sectors.
Thanks, Matt. Well, Matt Reed said he's here because of you, Stephen Gabriel. So I think you've got to have the next question.
Hi, Matt. How you doing? Hi, Matt. Yeah, actually, I had a question that's more Norway specific, so any Norwegian can answer, basically. It seems like there's the right mixture of carrots and sticks here. That's basically what we're coming down to in terms of incentives, or is Mark still here? No, I can say his comment was the stick, basically. But so when I was coming into Trondheim a few years ago, took a Tesla, of course, taxi, and then I asked the guy, why do you have Tesla? And he says, well, I don't just have one, I have 6 Teslas, because, it made more sense. So there's something going right with Norway, and the Vestland County is obviously another excellent example. So from what I know, and this is where I'd be interested to find out more information, from what I know, there were incentives like you didn't pay hydrocarbon taxes, clearly, you got free parking or whatever it is. So how many, well, first of all, was that correct? And then secondly, how many of those incentives, the carrots here, are translatable to other regions so that this model of Norway can be replicated? And I'll just talk about DC Water a little bit, some of the work we've done. They produce energy on site because they get it through the digestion process, and they produce methane. They get carbon credits. So the government bought in and said, we like what you're doing, not just them, but other people. So how much of this positive experience that we've seen in DC Water, as well as in Norway with the EVs and so on, is translatable? So it's a really broad question that any Norwegian can answer, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. So who wants to respond? Henrik.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a different or difficult story, this. Norway has, for kind of natural reasons, a decarbonized power sector. So when you then want to start cutting climate emissions, you need to do something else. And then the transport sector was the obvious choice, and that is really the driver behind it. For my money, the key incentive was simply the fact that we then also paid a lot of taxes for cars. So it was basically the tax cut on cars, which drove down costs to parity or beyond, which really was the key thing. And then all the other things, like driving in the bus lane, whatever, is more icing on the cake.
So that was about why has so much gone into transport, because that's the area which is emitting the most here in Norway. But behind that question from Stephen was, how can we use this sense of carrots and sticks to try and drive change, right? And so that we can all buy into it then. Would you like to, anybody like to kind of chew on that? Maybe Alexander or, Linda from
I would
Groningen.
just say the most important thing is to identify the main barriers for action and then address these barriers. And it can be then one time a stick and the other time a carrot. And I think many policies, you make an excellent point, that we should learn more about policy implementations in different countries. And I was once asked by the Dutch government to evaluate all kinds of policies that they implemented 10 years before. So, but I wasn't able to do so because there was no reliable data with a before and after measure or a control group and an experimental group. So you can't basically say anything about it. So learning by doing is really important, especially since we need to accelerate.
So we've got a question that's come in from Natasha. We've been lauding what you've been doing in Vestland, Solveig. I certainly have, because I live on an island and have to take dirty ferries all the time. But she's looking at it the other way and saying, why do policies stay locked in? Why are you so focused on electrifying mobility rather than rethinking mobility?
I think it's because we have a lot of the population. They are living on small islands, living across the fjord. They have to take a ferry to go to school. They have to ferry for work. They have to go ferry for shopping. They have to go ferry for going to the hospital. So public transport on ferries, it's a part of the system and integrated. You have actually no choice. And to deliver the service for the public, you have to have some kind of public transport when you're not building a bridge across the fjord. So you couldn't have this, the village couldn't live there without it. So it's a basic, and also it's for export, for sea farming. All the business, they need the same ferries. So we have no choice. And we have to, if we don't want to go by fossil fuel, you have to find another way to do it. And our solution is to go electric when it's possible, and when it's not possible, you have to use hydrogen maybe. We haven't used that so far because the acceleration and development in the electric transport have been going so fast that the fast passenger boats I was talking about, the few years ago we thought we were going hydrogen, but we aren't.
Yeah.
Much noise there.
Sorry, thank you very much. I hope, Natasha, you're happy with that answer. I'm going to ask Gunnar Eskeland to put the next question.
Well, I'd like to answer something here, and that is we are very trusting of government in Norway. We have high tax levels, and it goes without saying that stimulating green purchases with cuts in taxes is easier than stimulating green purchases with taxing or raising taxes on the dirty stuff. We don't have a car industry.
Yeah.
So it has been tradition in Norway to have high taxes on cars. It wasn't that difficult to use it for several neat purposes. One is we made huge, in my view, hard to justify cuts on electric vehicles. They are huge. Per ton reduced, it's something like 10 to 30 times quota prices in Europe. So they're huge. We justify it by saying, yeah, let's hope it drives costs down. I do think we use the same argument with the ferries in Vestland. We hope that when we do this, others will do the same. We hope that when we do this, costs are coming down. I do think that this includes some wishful thinking, but I also think that part of a question we could give the panel, and especially you, Linda, is because part of what you said was maybe we should oversell this transition because it has positive effect on others and so on. I'm not sure of that, but I want those who are visiting Norway to know that in my view as a public finance person, this instrument that we have used in the transport sector, it's not textbook, it's heterodox, it's pretty elegant, it's continuous and direct, it's not based on proxies, it's based on emissions, and you do the same in the taxation of ICE cars actually. They are taxed at point of purchase per gram per vehicle kilometer as in the registration document. Not textbook, pretty elegant. Does it work? Yes, it works. It should, because it's a big hammer.
But possibly it's Norway specific and culturally specific. So can you continue that? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to answer that. That's a really interesting insight because maybe for the psychologists in the crowd here, is it more effective to give you something if you're already doing it, like paying taxes, you get the benefit of not paying some fraction of the taxes, or to incentivize people to start from anew and to say, if you did X, you would get Y. So I think maybe that's the translatable thing, that if you're already paying high taxes or whatever it is, if you get some benefit by, reductions in taxes in this case. Is that psychology?
Well, there's a famous principle, I think it's also adopted by economists now. Losses loom larger than gains. Yeah. So people are more strongly driven by losses than gains. That is mostly, it's not always true. There's exceptions, but because if you reward something, then it's very clear what the desirable behavior is. If you only punish behavior, then it might not be clear what the desirable behavior is. But yeah.
And if you look at the IRA, for instance, it's all carrots, isn't it? It's all lots of reward in there, probably working on the same kind of psychology. Ragnhild Frengdale.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for a very interesting talks and questions this far. I'm interested in this relation between the urban and rural, because you've all spoken about the potential of cities to change, and mobility was just brought up here in one of the questions as well, and obviously mobility is something that is highly differentiated between different populations as well. So in Vestland County, where I'm very happy using the ferries that are electric, they're beautiful, and I'm looking forward to the boat between Bergen and Sogndal also being fairly emission-free. We have a kind of county that still is far away from the urban cities. Like we have Bergen, but then most of the other population lives fairly rural, and that's the same across a large part of Norway. Some places also, you know, we talk about incentivizing, de-incentivizing flying by having high prices. In counties like Finnmark, you can't really fly to the south without paying 10,000 kroners return trip. So, you know, these are differences within the population already. But I'm wondering, how do you see this like relation between making a transition in lifestyle in a city where some of it, particularly with the buses and the mobility of public transport, is fairly invisible for most people. I mean, it's not invisible, it's a good thing, but it's not changing the way that they live their lives. Whereas in more rural places, it seems that those things are more difficult, at least if we want to reduce like one car per person mobility, which is resource intensive and probably not feasible for the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's sort of like the painless side if you live in a city and the more painful side if you live in a rural community. Who would like to pick up on that?
Well, I've been
Alexander.
thinking from Sinta's perspective, we have 1,500 people working here in Trondheim. We consider ourselves a world-leading research institute, and unless we in the future are able to travel, I don't think we can stay in the front. You know, I think it's a real threat to competitiveness, and it will be an extreme centralization. Once the EU starts only, you know, allowing flights more than 3 hours, then everything will go to the European locations. So you know, that would be hugely painful for us because we would just lose out. And I think that's, from our perspective, it's impossible to not say we have to solve this technologically. We have to make flights zero emission, and we have to make it possible to fly in the future. I think mobility is so fundamental to human interaction. That's one of the areas that we really have to work hard to minimize everything going on. Can I make a comment about rethinking mobility as well?
Of course, you can talk about anything you like.
Because there was the question, you know, I really understand that the ferries needed, but if you look at the big cities, congestion is one of the biggest problems. And cities want to build bigger and bigger roads in order to alleviate congestion, and then when more people move to the city, and then you have a negative spiral. And we've seen that new technologies, and even old technologies, can solve some of the congestion problems. But the politicians have put so much of their personal stake into getting that new highway that they are unable to rethink the opportunities of using technology to optimize the use of traffic. For example, if you have every fifth vehicle being driven autonomously, you can stop the oscillation effects, and probably you will solve a lot of the transportation congestions. If you had shared mobility and capacity pricing, you could, you could probably solve congestion, but it's very difficult for politicians to incentivize such measures compared to opening new roads. And I think rethinking
that may be somewhere where the market itself could sort it out, because you could see in economic models that might be able to deliver those solutions without public money doing so. Henrik Setnes.
Yeah, Alexander always says so interesting things, so I changed my mind while I'm waiting. I think this kind of, for us as well, moving people about is super important within the company, right? So we have power plants, you know, in the middle of the mountains around the world. And I was going to talk about EVs, but I will talk about something else. In Peru, we have some power plants which are so remote that it's quite difficult to get to them. Actually, in addition to the other effect, it can also be a bit risky to go there, right, for the people. So it's an HSE topic as well. And there we've actually started using drones to fly up and have a look instead of going there to inspect, you know. So those things, I think, would also possibly be a bit relevant to Ragnhild's question, that some of the trips you do when living rurally may be avoided by other technological solutions. You know, the Teams meeting instead of having to travel. These kind of things will, of course, impact the amount of mobility you need without actually worsening your life. It's actually bettering
So technology
your life.
rides to the rescue again, Ragnhild. Let's have another question. Thomas.
Yeah, thanks for a very interesting panel. I wanted to use Linda's point to sort of make a link between this session and some of the other sessions on infrastructure and renewable energy build-out. So you said, and I agree, that we can do things as I's, right, or we can do things as we's. And we've seen in this session now a lot of examples of acceptance, actually, on behalf of regions, cities, countries, of ferries, taxis, charging infrastructures, all these things. And we can think about those, we could think about those as kind of discreetly as, you know, instances of acceptance or technology adoption, these types of things. But we could also, and this is then a challenge maybe more to the practitioners, we could also think about those instances as instances where ordinary people are actually engaging with, interacting with this transition in practice, right? And it's the same transition that we've been discussing earlier today, the infrastructure transition, the production transition. That is what you're interacting with when you're enjoying that silence on that ferry, Henrik, right? So, but you're just enjoying that silence. I mean, but it's a huge opportunity to engage those people on that ferry, in that charging situation, on that bus, to actually understand that what you're accepting here is related to a energy system shift. So any ideas about how to use those to the practitioners?
We have time for one last question. I'm going to put it to Matt Rees, if you don't mind. And it's come in remotely, and it's really picking up on the point that Steve Gabriel made earlier, that what are the lessons we can learn from the positive examples that you've given us. He asked about the carrots and sticks in Norway, but also what you've been doing in DC Water. Are other water companies around the world following you? Are you working with other companies? Is it an exportable model?
Yeah, I would say that we are following others and others are following us. There was a comment made earlier about the trust in government in Norway, and I happen to have just been a part of a delegation in Denmark where they are further ahead than we are in looking at their net zero approaches for running their water utilities. Now, that is driven by regulation in Denmark. We've had a couple of references in this session and earlier to the IRA and how that is a system of carrots to help fund some of these programs and projects. And that is helping us advance some of the concepts and technologies. But the one thing I will say that Dr. Gabriel mentioned the renewable energy credits that we get. So we are producing this biogas. We're using it to fuel our digesters. We're also receiving revenue from that, non-ratepayer revenue, we call it, in renewable energy credits. We also have solar RECs, we have RINs, but you need a market in place to make that happen. So the answer is not always technology. The answer might be markets and policies. And to the degree that we can, now we're talking government level, and that might be local, it might be regional, it might be national. To the degree that we can replicate some of these markets and policies, those then enable the technologies for other water utilities, for example, to advance and then can be paid for, not only paid for, but actually producing revenue on the back end. So it's that kind of model that involves, it's complex. It involves technology, policy, people, governments, but there are examples out there. So we hope that others could follow, certainly.
And you've brought our discussion to a beautiful conclusion, Matt Rees. Thank you very much. I've learned so much, unexpectedly, that the importance of carrots as opposed to sticks, the importance of using less energy and the way in which energy efficiency is being built into the new technologies that we're hearing about, the importance of marketization, and it goes on and on and on. I hope you've also had a really productive day. Shall we say thank you to our great panelists, Henrik Satnes, Professor Steg, Alexander Böckjov, Solveig, whose surname I cannot get my head around, but Solveig in Westland, and Matt Rees in Washington, D.C. Thank you all very much. So our Energy Transition Conference, the 7th from NTNU, Crisis, Crossroads, and Courage, has now come to a conclusion. I hope that all of you have felt that you've had a chance to be part of this conversation and that you've taken away at least one actionable thing from today. It's been a pleasure being your moderator. Till the next time, bye-bye.